Now, Namibia has one of the most profound pension fund systems in Africa, ranking first in terms of pension fund assets versus GDP, over 100%, sometimes even 110%, followed only by South Africa, which are ranking at about 58, 60%. So that's quite something. But where relative size presents one side of the story, the index compares pension fund systems across the world in three major areas, namely adequacy, sustainability, and integrity, and highlights any areas for improvement. So in terms of today's program, we'll switch over to a live webinar with Tim Jenkins, and I'll introduce him shortly. Thereafter, we've got two speakers here, and then a panel discussion with an esteemed panel. If you have questions during the webinar, you can find a barcode on your program there. I don't know if you can all see it there. There's a little barcode. You can scan it. Then you can just enter your name and title and your question, and it will feed through right to Australia. Okay. Now, without further ado, would like to introduce Tim Jenkins, who is really the driving force behind the index, and who will take us through the mechanics of the index and discuss how Namibia and regional peers fare against various criteria. Tim Jenkins is an experienced actuary and superannuation professional. He is a partner at Mercer Consulting in Sydney and leads Mercer's Australian superannuation consulting team. Tim specializes in providing strategic and product advice on all aspects of superannuation. He is the lead author of the Mercer CFA Institute Global Pension Index. Tim is a fellow of the Institute of Actuaries of Australia and has been chair of the Actuaries Institute Superannuation and Investments Practice Committee since 2018 and received the 2023 Distinguished Service Award for his contributions to the Institute. He also is a member of the ATO Facilitated Superannuation Industry Stewardship Group. In other words, a big deal in this industry. Okay, so the webinar will start at 9 o'clock sharp, so there'll be a few minutes until we cross over. So perhaps you can use the time and jot down any sort of questions you might have and try out the QR code system. In terms of bathrooms, they're just down the stairs here. I'm sure everyone has been here before. I think at this point, while we have the time, heartfelt thank you to the sponsors of today's event, which are the CFA Institute and Old Mutual Corporate. So thank you very much, and be in touch soon.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Razia Ghani, Executive Head of Investments at NMG Benefits and Vice President of the CFA Society of South Africa. I'm very pleased to welcome you all today to the annual discussion of the 2025 Mercer CFA Institute Global Pensions Index results. The Global Pensions Index, as you all may recall, is a collaborative research project sponsored by CFA Institute, the Global Association of Investment Professionals, in collaboration with the Monash Center for Financial Studies and Mercer. To deliver and expand on today's results, we have the new lead author to the index, Tim Jenkins, also partner at Mercer. Tim has taken over from Dr. Knox, who most of you would remember from our previous webinars. Tim is an experienced actuary and a superannuation professional. He's a partner at Mercer Consulting in Sydney and leads Mercer's Australian superannuation consulting team. Tim specializes in providing strategic and product advice on all aspects of superannuation. For anyone who may not be familiar with the term, a superannuation fund, often called a super, is essentially just a retirement savings vehicle and is most commonly associated with Australia. It's designed to help individuals accumulate money during their working life to provide income in retirement. So the system works very similarly to the DC systems that we use in our part of the world. Tim is a fellow of the Institute of Actuaries of Australia. He's been the chair of the Actuaries Institute Superannuation and Investment Practice Committee since 2018 and received the 2023 Distinguished Service Award for his contributions to the Institute. He is also a member of the ATO Facilitated Superannuation Industry Stewardship Group. For those in the African context, we've spoken about what superannuation means. So it's essentially the equivalent of our DC systems in Australia. As we've done previously, in addition to Tim, we also have Belinda Sullivan joining us. Belinda is the head of corporate consulting strategy at Alex Forbes. Alex Forbes works very closely with Mercer, collating the data for the SA, Namibia, and Botswana areas. So they work on the African element in terms of the research that goes into the index. Belinda has been with AA for the last 20 years and holds a BCom Economics and Business Economics degree from the Nelson Mandela University and is a CFP as well. She chairs the Alex Forbes Institutional Risk Benefits Committee. With those formalities out of the way, there's just a few housekeeping items. Viewers can use the question tab on the far left of the screen to prompt questions during the presentation. Questions will be posed during the Q&A session at the end. There's also a feedback comment tab on the far left of the screen for viewers to add their feedback on the content of the webinar. One CPD point will be awarded to viewers who've watched the full duration of the webinar, and CPD certificates will be given after the webinar. With that said, Tim, please do enlighten us with the changes and additions and interesting aspects that have occurred over the last year within the global pension fund space. Over to you, Tim.
Thank you so much, and hello everybody. Hey, it's an absolute privilege to be the lead author of the Global Pension Index. This is my second stint at Mercer, and my first stint, my job was working with Dr. Knox to get permission from Mercer globally to actually prepare the index. And why was that hard? It was actually hard because the US, America, was not number one. And the Mercer gods at the time thought that wasn't very acceptable, rather than saying, here are some great opportunities to improve the pension system in the US. Anyway, we managed to get approval, and the number of countries in the index has blossomed over its 17 years, from 11 in year one in 2009 through now to 52 participating systems. We use the word systems because Hong Kong, for example, is now no longer a country. It is part of China, for example, on that. So we're quite careful with the different systems and the names that we call things. So without further ado, let me head in and think about and talk to you about why it's important to look and compare and contrast retirement income systems from around the world, but also recognize the fact that it's hard. Systems vary in different countries. You look at this, and different countries are at different stages of their economic sophistication, different population levels. Some countries have big government debt, others don't. Some have aging populations. Well, in fact, many countries now have aging populations. European countries and Eastern Asian countries have vastly falling birth rates. The workforce and how it comes together is changing as well. Part-time jobs, gig jobs, full-time jobs. The length of time people stay working is changing. Some systems are defined benefits, some are defined contribution. Some have investment assets there. Others are pay as you go. Some are all provided by the government. Some are relying primarily on private sector. So it's different, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't try and compare the systems around the world. And that is the aim of the Global Pension Index, a tool to help the legislators, regulators, and those working in the systems improve the systems in the various countries in the index. So it starts off by, here's an example. We look at the system and we start right back on the World Bank model, the multi-pillar approach. There are questions about how that is maturing over time, but broadly speaking, what we have is 4 pillars on top of a basic minimum level of pension, often referred to as pillar 0 on this. And different countries have different combinations of those. And there's nuances in how they all work through. So we use that as the system behind that, and then we take that forward and we start to structure this into the Global Pension Index. And the way we've done this, we're looking at a longitudinal series. So while we will tweak the questions year on year, we do it very carefully and mindfully, working with an advisory board who looks at this from the CFA Institute, from Mercer, from academics. Help us with that, hence the Monash University connection. That's a university in the state of Victoria near Melbourne in Australia on that. So what we do is, using the various questions, and I'll come on to these, we have 3 sub-indices which combine to make the overall index. And they measure 3 things, recognizing that the systems can look very different in different countries, and a fully privatized system isn't necessarily a better or worse system than a fully public system. So we have adequacy as the first one. What benefits are likely to be paid to retirees in those countries? Secondly, sustainability. Can the existing systems keep delivering? Do you have confidence that the government will be able to afford what is provided, or the private sector has enough checks and balances to make sure the money will be there? And thirdly, integrity. This goes to the next bit. Are the systems encouraging confidence? Do you have good governance practices? Is there great disclosure? What is shown to various individuals participating in those systems? And we weight those, and there's been constant weight over the 17 years of the index, with the most weighting, 40% on is there enough adequacy, 35% on sustainability, and slightly less on integrity, which doesn't mean it's not important, but you can have all the best integrity in the world, but if you don't have enough and it won't keep going for long enough, so what? So that's how we start to look at the index as a whole. And as you heard at the start, we're now up to 52 different systems. Here's a map which shows around the world the various systems on there. White is where it's not done yet. And what we're really focused on here is we grade the systems A through E. And two things in there that are really important for me is that none of the systems now in the index are E grade. E means it's a poor system in the early stages of development. A, on the other hand, is a robust system, one that there's always room for improvement, and you need a score of 80 out of 100 to be A grade. A B grade system has got some really good features, just one or two things maybe to improve in one area. So I'd give an example for that in my own market of Australia. Australia is only B grade for adequacy, and I'll come on to that about why that might be. Well, I can be asked the question on it. And that's what holds Australia back, but is A grade for the other two parts. So we know where the focus could be if there's affordability for that. There's often, in the first place, you've got to get the balance right between the two. What we'll find is, as we start to talk through today about the Southern African systems, the Southern African systems are C-grade systems, and these are ones which have some great features, but there's room for improvement with some major risks in certain areas. And I won't go into all of those. Belinda afterwards will be talking through and giving more insight into the Southern African systems themselves. But the key here is that it's not just the thoughts of someone at Mercer or Alex Forbes about how we get the index scores. Wherever possible, we're relying on objective external data, and critically not from the governments themselves, who may have an interest in having a high grade put through. So it's objective data, ostensibly mostly from the OECD, from the IMF, from the World Bank, supplemented by things like the Economist Intelligence Unit. And critically, in every system in there, we have local experts who can look at the information, overlay this, and provide some expert analysis alongside this, which helps us interpret where things sit. And as I mentioned, for Botswana, Namibia, and South Africa, Alex Forbes provides that for the index. If you do not have a system expert that can be used, it's not possible to put the system into the index. So wherever possible, we try and keep away from subjective elements because they're difficult to measure. We also know that in some areas, some desirable data is not available, and we look to approximate that when that is the case rather than exclude the system. We use more than 50 indicators. And of course, when you start to do that and the number of questions there, some of the weightings are subjective. That's why we have the advisory board, and we will tweak the weightings very slightly, adjust those 50 indicators and questions slightly year on year. We don't want to make the past series invalid as we look at the longitudinal analysis here. Last 2 points on this. Because of some of these elements, the focus is more on the grade than it is if it's plus or minus 5. So there's some different pieces on that. And the index represents the overall system. It doesn't represent what one individual might receive. And in particular, if he or she is in the best pension fund available, often those are the public sector funds in the various countries there. We look at the non-public sector systems more as we compare through. So here are the overall results where I flagged the C-grade systems of South Africa, Namibia, and Botswana, and I'll make just a couple of observations on that. That South Africa has improved from a D-grade system to a C-grade system as it moved from its 2024 to 2025 results. South Africa has been in the index since 2014, so it's 10, 11 years in. Namibia is a new entrant this year, so there's no back series, but you'll see alongside Botswana, it's as high as you can get, just beneath 60, before it becomes a C+ system. The Botswanan system has now been in, this is the third year for Botswana in the system. So you see there's quite a range. If you look on the right-hand side, the A-grade systems and the B+, there is quite a leading towards the Northern European systems in there. They have some good features, often with adequacy, what's provided by the state, supplemented by a concept of social pooling, if I can put it that way, where often it's about how we look after our retirees as a whole, as opposed to specific individuals that you often see in, say, the Australian system and many of the other systems as you go down that piece. Plus, they do have substantive private sector systems on top of the national system, which improves the affordability and sustainability on there. So let me unpack this just a little more. What's different about 2025 report to 2024 for those of you in the audience who heard Dr. Knox talk last year, for example? We've increased the number of systems by 4. That was the most increase we've had in any one year. Namibia, one of those systems, Kuwait, Oman and Panama, as we look around the world on those and various places on those systems. We got updated data in 2 of the critical areas from OECD and IMF, and often this is what moves the score the most. And the OECD in particular, they published a key publication called Pensions at a Glance that provides information like net replacement rates, which is a key component of the adequacy sub-index. How much do I get in retirement for the average earner compared to the average wage going into retirement? We use slightly more than that in the index, but that's the biggest weighting element of that. And there was some substantive movements in the net replacement rates in countries like Hong Kong, where it substantially changed and improved those net replacement rates. In fact, one of the biggest movements in net replacement rates year on year, not from that source, was from from Botswana, which improved the adequacy rating significantly in Botswana from 39.7 up to 54.3, generally from that one source. And then the third piece on this, every year we have a special chapter of interest, and I'll come on to that at the end if time permits on this webinar, the pace I go into that. And this chapter in 2025 reflected discussions in many countries about how to get the balance right between society as a whole and what the private pension funds do with their investments. Very topical for the CFA societies, you can imagine, on this. We've got countries like the UK having the Mansion House rules coming in, dictating what percentage of investments need to be in infrastructure, social type investments, and then what percentage of those should be in the UK, for example. And many countries are on that exploratory path to try and get the balance on there. So we'll head into those. So into the adequacy sub-index, this is 40% of the total. 20% depends on the minimum or base pension that is provided, the net replacement rate 25%, and system design features 25%. Things like, is it a retirement savings system or is it a retirement income system, if you get the difference? Is it a system which is all about accumulation, or is it built-in decumulation and making this about retirement income, not a retirement savings pot? Is there preservation to take your retirement savings or your workplace savings into retirement? And that's something which I know has changed in South Africa to improve the ratings on adequacy over the last couple of years with the sidecar approach. Are there incentives to save as well? Is it whether it's a tax incentive, whether it's co-contributions from the government? So, all these are different points that head in. The top three countries there, Kuwait, Netherlands, France. Interestingly, lots of European countries have an A rate for adequacy. Countries like Spain and Austria, as well as France, for example, have that. But can I just put the counter to this? The population doesn't believe that by the time they get to retirement, the country will be able to afford the systems provided. They're pay-as-you-go, unfunded government systems with limited private support on top. In general, it's not completely true. So if I take France, it's A grade for adequacy, E grade, bottom you can have for sustainability. Same in Austria, Spain, and Germany, A grade adequacy, but is down to D grade for sustainability. So often the two go hand in glove. You can get great on one, but then there's an issue on sustainability taking you back. It's countries like Kuwait where, that the population size versus natural resources puts them in a really good position of sustainability to give the benefits that are provided. And Netherlands, which has a really long-term system of savings. And as I mentioned at the start, they've got this concept there of social equalization like the Nordics on there. So that's what's coming through on those. Botswana improved from a D grade system to a C grade system for adequacy. South Africa and Namibia both stayed, Namibia's new for everything. South Africa stayed a D grade system. Sustainability is 35% weighting. Looking often there, how many people are in the funded pension plans? What's the coverage? I take my own market in Australia. You think it's universal, it's mandated, but if you're self-employed, you don't have to. If you are out of the workforce, it's only if you're on parental leave that there's the contribution paid for you. There are carers' leaves. There's no funding going in. There's no contribution for people in that type of job or lack of job in there when you're unemployed. So the coverage is important. Some systems have a way of protecting people out of the workforce, others don't. Also important for sustainability is how do your pension assets sit as a percentage of the GDP in the country concerned, 15% weighting for that. And the demographic issues are critical here. So the key dynamics going into this, the old age dependency ratios, which is looking at the birth rates, longevity. It's also looking at normal retirement ages, which vary considerably around the world, as you would expect because of the variations in life expectancy after birth in different countries and at retirement in different countries on there. In some countries, things like age pension are means tested. Australia is the great example for that, which improves sustainability, but it has the counter effect on adequacy. It is a social security safety net rather than a universal pension. And in all these types also, we're looking at the savings here for the government as well. Is there money there? Is the government in debt on there? Looking at real economic growth as well, where we're looking at the last 4 years as well as the projected for the next 3 years. And we actually got a lot of increases in the index scores between 2024 and 2025 because we dropped off the last year of COVID, which really impacted on economic growth. So with that gone out of the real economic growth, that gave a tilt to many countries' scores. Looking at Botswana and South Africa, though, there was limited movement between 2024 and 2025 on those sustainability scores. And lastly, I go to integrity on this, which is about the regulation, the governance. Do you have investment policy statements required for private pension investments? protection? What's the costs of administering the system? So it's not the cost of the benefits themselves, but is it efficient how this is structured? So you have countries like Ireland where there are still thousands of occupational pension schemes compared to an environment like Australia where we're down to 75 APRA regulated funds in the system, a huge change from 10 years ago when there were a couple of thousand schemes. It's a big movement in that. So integrity top scores, Finland, Singapore and Hong Kong. In fact, Singapore became the first Asian country to get an A grade for the Global Pension Index overall. It's a nationalized system there. Very credible scores for the Southern African countries. In fact, when we look at the index overall, 25 of the 52 systems had a B plus or better grade when it comes to integrity. So there is a lot being done to show members, individuals in the system, how well things are happening, showing them information, say in a defined contribution world about their own account balance. So I put those all on one page to show where things sit overall. 60 is the threshold for being a C plus system compared to C. So you'll see Botswana and Namibia knocking on the door. It wouldn't take much with either a change to the data coming through from the OECD, from the World Bank, IMF to change that, or some tweaks to the local systems working through to have the systems a C plus graded system. South Africa has just tweaked up from D system to a C system. On 50 is the bottom range for a C grade system. Belinda, I'm sure, will talk to some of those. So what I did, just quickly points here, I thought it would be interesting, and these slides are part of the webinar and you can look at these afterwards, to look at where are the questions where each of the three Southern African systems didn't score so well. Which of the questions in there which had low scores, and which gives an indication of where, if this were affordable, if this were politically palatable, if the economy permitted, if the way private citizens behaved in how they look at various priorities, what are the things that could be increased on the scores? What are available there? It doesn't mean any of these could actually happen quickly, but these are ones just to think about if you were the legislator, if you were someone looking at the overall sustainability of society alongside the pension systems, what could you look at? So here for Botswana, remembering population of Botswana is a lot smaller, for example, than South Africa. Some things, the levers could be pulled more easily. Here are some scores or some areas which were low scoring compared to some other countries. I won't go through those. You can look at those on the screen. Did the same for Namibia. Some of the questions are quite similar on those. And lastly, for South Africa as well. So there's some thoughts there. These can be unpacked, so you can work these through with the local CFA societies. The information is here. The aim of the index is to provide information which allows discussion and allows debate. Ultimately, the aim is that it improves the outcomes for retirees in each of the systems. So with that, the last couple of slides I wanted to go to, I'm just looking at the clock and I think I've got 5 minutes, maybe maximum, to go through this. I'll go relatively quickly. Happy to take questions on these points. The feature chapter, as I mentioned, is influence with discussion with the advisory board, the CFA Institute, Mercer, what we're hearing from the various systems, what's in the news. And in many countries, debates started, particularly when the private pension fund assets get beyond, say, 50% of gross domestic product, GDP, there's a great interest on, well, wouldn't it be great if I could harness retirement savings for what I'm after as the government to improve things? So in those worlds, like the UK, there's a lot of discussion on, well, what can we do that's fair? So what we did, we produced the chapter really focusing on how can governments balance those national interests with member best interests. And we started looking at, well, what's currently out there? Where are there direct policies, things like caps or restrictions on where you can invest? Where are there indirect policies, things like influence? So you get a better tax break if you invest a certain way rather than requiring you as a pension fund to invest a certain way. So if you look at the index itself, which is publicly available, and go through the special chapter, you'll see things like in the Southern African countries, there are ceilings on investments in certain asset classes, domestic equities, property alternatives, listed shares, to give some examples in there, and real estate. And then we have restrictions on the level of foreign investments in countries like Botswana, 50% cap on foreign equities. So there are some hard rules there. The observation I will make, given the time, is that of the 52 systems, the 9 systems that had the highest overall scores on there with the pension fund assets at a reasonable percentage of GDP had next to no restrictions on how investments could be put in place by the private pension funds. The exception perhaps being in-house assets where they're employer-led, to try and keep, you don't want to invest your private pension assets in your employer when you're an employer fund. If the two could go the wrong way completely at the same time, you lose your job, you lose your pension. So we came up lastly with these 8 principles to balance the interest. You'll see as you look at those that there needs to be macro awareness. It's no good not recognizing the fact that there is an impact and interaction between the fiscal and social policies that you have and what that means with the pension funds and present and future retirees. But you'll see as we go through there, retirement first, act in the best interest of pension fund beneficiaries. These come first. Robust governance and comprehensive investment policies by the intermediaries, fiduciaries, sponsors of the fund, full market access, and really a push towards policy incentives, not mandates. Not for discussion here, but one of the principles is how do you get scale to collaborate either with the government or with other private pension funds to get scale to increase the investment opportunities. When infrastructure comes to mind, for example, and transparency, not constraints. So with those, I will finish my presentation. I'll be here at the end for the Q&A, and I will hand back to Razia. Thank you so much for letting me present to you. As I say, it's a real honor to be the lead author. And I'm really excited about how the index is used for good, particularly by the CFA societies.
Thank you very much, Tim, for those very valuable insights. Quite interesting results that came out of last year's survey. I did want to just very quickly expand on the C grade system, where most of us in the African region seems to fall. It is defined as a system that has good features, but also some risks and or shortcomings that should be addressed, without which these improvements, without these improvements, the efficacy or long-term sustainability of that system can be questioned. So that's just so that we understand where we all of us fall in currently. Belinda, over to you now on to just take us through some of the nuances within the local African data.
Thanks very much, Razia, and good morning, everyone. Thank you very much to Tim for that insightful presentation. I think first of all, I want to just take a step back and looking at the changing environment and landscape. And one of the key things that I came across was that the assets for retirement in terms of the OECD research has grown by 10% in 2024, reaching 63.1 trillion US dollars. So it's more than tripled since 2003. And this is really due to stronger equity markets and steady contributions to the retirement industry over time. So you can see in terms of the 8 principles where Tim starts talking about how we look to balance pension participant interests with national priorities. It's key when we look at the amount of money that is available in the system and how important ensuring that sustainability becomes a key element in terms of managing these assets across the globe. So really the strength has been supported by the market performance and policy reforms, and that's led to expanded participation. So we've seen a lot stronger participation in retirement funds across the globe, as well as different pension models that come across. And we see that is very evident in the results across the globe, and particularly in the Southern African story as well. So we have a complex environment, but we're still seeing that there's positive growth for members. And how do we manage that and ensure that we protect members throughout their working lifetime and once they go into retirement? And more importantly, looking at the fact that we have large populations of people who are not employed, they fall outside of the current occupational net for savings, or they sit outside of the social grants that are available by the various countries. And how do we support that and make sure that from the adequacy, sustainability and integrity perspective, that we bring more people into the net and take them into account? Now, it comes back to the word sustainability, and something that I really like is something called impact consciousness. And that's really about securing better outcomes for members, for people today, as well as for the future generations to come. And also to ensure that while we're building that net, being able to assist and educate people to save more for retirement and how to get to that point, understanding finances, creating financial literacy, will also ensure that there's a world for the people to retire into one day. Just taking us through the global pension index and the Africa footprint. First of all, we look at Botswana and Namibia with their C gradings along with South Africa. Both Botswana and South Africa improving from their D gradings in 2024 to the C grading in 2025. Tim has unpacked the rationale for that. I'll go into a little bit more depth around South Africa. But one of the key aspects here, and I get asked, why is South Africa lagging the other two Southern African countries? And one of the key things to consider is that when we look at occupational funds, when we look at the public retirement system, both Namibia and Botswana offer a public state old age pension, depending on the age, obviously, of those that are applying for that pension. Botswana has mandatory participation in the retirement fund, while both Namibia and South Africa is voluntary participation in the retirement funds. And if we look at South Africa's side, we have a means-tested state old pension. So in other words, not everyone can qualify to get that pension. So it's really in looking at now, how do we expand that and how do we improve coverage, not just for South Africans, but also more broadly across our Southern African footprint. I'm also pleased to advise that in 2026, we'll be looking at Kenya as well from an East African perspective to participate in the global pension index. So really enhancing our footprint across Africa and being able to deliver more in-depth story about how the funding system in the various countries in South Africa works, so we can actually start learning from one another. A key aspect in South Africa is that occupational funds are not compulsory. So when we start looking at the system in South Africa relative to the public funding that we have available to employees, to unemployed people in South Africa, it's very different if we look at the rest of the world. So the rest of the world and the globe that has been tested within the Global Pension Index, they have a mature public system. So they're looking at pay-as-you-go systems where Joe Public contributes to those systems and then is able to receive a benefit from the system at retirement. In South Africa, we sort of have the inverse. We started with the private South African retirement system, which has now morphed into a really big, mature system. However, we're still lacking from a national savings perspective, and how we now need to look at how do we take care of the member on the ground, the employee who perhaps hasn't saved enough, or those individuals, the poorest of the poor, who perhaps have nothing significant to hang their hat on when they go in retirement. So how do we improve that? If we take a step back to our occupational retirement funding system, it is not mandatory for employers in South Africa to provide retirement funds to their employees. So there is a gap in terms of how we can already start to ensure that if we can manage that gap, it will then limit the impact on the state further down the line. So obviously we want to make sure that we have this mechanism. How do we utilize it better? And how do we start making sure that employees who have access to the retirement savings system do not take all their money and spend it? So right up until 1 September 2024, with the introduction of the two-pot system, members were able to exit their companies and to be able to access 100% of the money that they had saved to date. With the introduction of the two-pot system, it now introduces this balance of short-term needs with the long-term objective of saving enough for retirement. And that is a significant step for us as a country, because what it's doing is it is protecting leakage from the system. It is ensuring people who've saved all through their lives don't end up spending all the money that they've saved, and ultimately have enough to save in retirement one day. So they get to have a fruitful life while being able to take care of their needs over the short term through their working lifetime. And I think that's a significant improvement for our system. And I think if we go back to COVID, I think the recognition there that people were saving in these occupational funds but didn't have money in the end when they needed it most, they didn't have liquidity. This now takes care of that with obviously specific guardrails in place. And that has really shifted us from a D to a C. And I think that makes me really happy to finally see us hitting that C mark. And I'm sure that there's a lot more that we can do as a retirement system in South Africa. So key drivers in terms of the introduction of the two-pot is the compulsory preservation. So 2/3 of the contribution is allocated to a retirement component. So members cannot just access that money at any time. They can only retire from it. So when they reach retirement, they can only then access an income from the money that they've saved, rather than getting lump sum benefits out of the system, spending that, and then having to become reliant on the state. So I think that is a significant improvement. And as we see our old legacy model shift over time and all new people joining our occupational funds, participating in the two-pot system, there's going to be more sustainability in terms of those long-term benefits. The savings pot gives accessibility to cash over the short term, so that members are allowed to access money once a year, up to sort of minimum requirements, and as I said, specific guardrails in place to ensure that if you are accessing money, that you're doing it for the right reasons. It's not just one of those shows because I can. So making good financial decisions around your savings, planning throughout their working lifetime to improve their outcome. And I think really being able to look at global best practice, how do we then take into account how different the people are in South Africa, and applying that in a way to make sure that we balance immediate needs with the long-term objectives, and ensuring that we then have a way to bring more people into the net. So while this is a really great step in the right direction, and it's a really positive step for South Africans, we obviously know that there is a bigger gap in terms of the broader community. One of the key aspects that has come to light, and I think it's also exacerbated from COVID, is the high levels of household debt and the limited ability for people to save. So one of the aspects in terms of looking at the trends for people taking their money out of the retirement savings now that they have access from a liquidity perspective has been raised by people saying that they need this money because of ongoing indebtedness. And when we look at indebtedness and trying to improve household saving rates, I see that that is sort of a thread that goes through the Namibian story as well as the Botswana story. And I think in terms of being able to improve those outcomes, obviously financial literacy is key. And we have to look at how we continue to reform the system and collaborate. So it's not just about the private sector changing the system. It is about collaboration with government, industry, and the various stakeholders to make sure that we can improve outcomes for those who have access to occupational funds. How do we ensure that those employees who don't provide those benefits are able to afford to deliver those type of benefits to employees, as well as then to look at how we further expand the coverage. So looking at the workplace, which in South Africa as a catalyst for getting people into the retirement system, getting them to save for retirement, helping to build financial literacy and provide communication, and then seeing the occupational funds. How can we manage greater accessibility for all employees? How do we bring people who are, for example, in an informal sector, how do we get them to save for retirement? How do we get them to recognize that it's not just about putting your money in the bank, but about, or under the mattress, but it's about making sure that you have a strategy to build those savings and to support them. And then to look at the broader population that perhaps does not have any trade, does not have any other ways or means of saving for retirement, to bring them into a national type of savings coverage. So one of the key things is also to look at mandatory contributions. So making sure, as I said, that we bring all employers into the net, increasing the support for the elderly, to improve adequacy. So I think if we are able to have a system that can provide more, so if I look at the mandatory coverage from a Botswana perspective, everyone from in the public is able to get a state old age pension. You know, if we bring that in, it improves the adequacy from our side as well. And then also encouraging older age workforce participation to improve sustainability. It also brings in mentorship, training, and education of those younger employees coming through the system to better understand what it is that I think older workers can look back and say, what is it that we regret or could have done better as younger employees in the system, and educating them through that process. So while I've highlighted, particularly in South Africa, the two-pot system is definitely a positive step in the right direction, but we definitely have to strengthen more to improve the sustainability element, as well as to improve the adequacy section of what we provide from a retirement perspective. I think a really interesting part is looking at the 8 principles again that Tim spoke to in terms of balancing the pension interest with the national priorities. And I think when we look at South Africa from an investment perspective, Namibia and Botswana, we see changes in terms of looking at how investments can be better utilized to improve outcomes for the public. So if we start looking at that reciprocal relationship between the employer, the employee, the macroeconomic environment, as well as the community that our employees, members, and population actually live in, if we're able to encourage and have an investable environment where this money can be appropriately invested for the benefit of members to ensure that the retirement outcomes come first, within strict governance and sound practices, we should be able to improve the outcomes and the infrastructure development that's needed to really improve outcomes for all South Africans, all Namibians, and all Botswana people over the long term. So just in closing, I think it's critical that we look at financial education, because I think that is the critical first step in ensuring the improvement in the schools, especially on the African continent, and the long-term sustainability of being able to deliver good solutions to all who participate. Thank you very much, Razia. Thank you, Tim.
Thanks very much, Belinda. Thank you for that. We've actually got quite a number of questions, so I'm going to dive straight into those. The first question is from Simnikiwe Tuta at Old Mutual. Good morning. There's a great insight. Is there a measure of whether or not the index is being implemented or utilized, and how is that measured? So maybe I'll just take that one very quickly. The index is in fact more of a benchmark for evaluating the resilience of retirement systems worldwide. So Mercer and Monash and its partners measure the index every year. So I think for most countries, it's really more of a benchmark that you'd look at and essentially compare yourself to. In South Africa, we do have a retirement reform workshop where the aim of that workshop is really to look at how can we improve our schooling. Tim, I don't know if you'd like to add anything to that.
I would love to do that, because this is the nirvana. We have many examples of where the index has been picked up by the legislators and actively worked on what could we do, what insight does this provide that allows us to enhance the outcomes for our retirees. So I'll give my latest example on this. I'm meeting in a week's time with the New Zealand Retirement Commission. The level of retirement savings has become a political issue. The different parties have different views, all of them enhancing from where it currently sits. The Retirement Commission wants to talk to me on the back of a presentation that I gave to the CFA Society there. So that's a live example.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, that's very, very useful. And I think that's exactly the kind of outcomes that we're hoping for from our retirement reform workshop as well, where we frequently invite the regulator, etc. And I think that's actually been quite positive in terms of the engagement. Okay, next question is from Mary at C Quadrant Ampega Asset Management. And they would like to know, they would be interested, I think, Tim, this is for you again, on your thoughts on the Armenian pension system, which, yeah.
So we've got 52 different systems in the index, which is 2/3 of the world's population, but Armenia is not yet in the index. And part of the reason for that is the availability of the OECD data and how do we get certain things for Armenia. plus lack of local expert in the market that we can use alongside this. So we're open to any country to be added through this. So if the person who asked the question is really keen, please reach out to me and we can maybe explore how that might happen, what's feasible, is that affordable, how does this work?
Thank you for that. I think if you are interested, you can contact the CFA Society South Africa, and we'll put you in touch with Tim to further that. Another question, Tim, for you. If there was anything about the Australian superannuation system that you could change, what would it be? And is a 12% minimum contribution sufficient?
Oh, that's a great question. It's like someone has been looking at the system in Australia. So here's one. I'm going to give an answer about what's practical to change, and then another one that I would love, but actually is not affordable. Okay, so I'll do the latter one first. The net replacement rate for retirement savings, the 12% super guarantee plus the means tested age pension for an average income earner is actually only about 39%. So you're only getting 39% of what you were earning your last full-time year before you entered retirement phase. That is pretty low compared to many Western countries on there, where to get full marks on that question, you need a net replacement rate of 70%.
Yeah.
But in one sense, whilst that's the weakness of the system, it's also the strength because of sustainability, and the private sector 12%. So what's practical is actually converting the system from an accumulation system, where Australia is one of the first in the world to get really big on private sector defined contribution, and make it a retirement income system by actually having more guardrails and incentives about how you actually convert your retirement pot into a lifetime income stream. And that's what's happening at present. That will make a big difference to outcomes in Australia. I could go on forever, but I see there's a number of questions, so I might just close that one.
That's quite an interesting
Rosia,
comment.
sorry.
We've just had that legislation in South Africa in terms of the two-pot, which now forces people to annuitize 2/3 of their retirement income when they retire. And so, which I assume, Belinda, would have led to some of our improvement in the schools.
Definitely, Razia, but I just wanted to add on to Tim's point is that when we've modeled in South Africa in the defined contribution environment, in order to achieve a replacement ratio of around 75%, we expect people to contribute 17% in order to achieve that outcome. So it is significant. And I know that affordability becomes a huge question. And I suppose if you are making something mandatory, then you have to look at middle of the road and affordability.
Thanks, Belinda. I guess in the Australian case, they need to be, I assume they allow additional voluntary contributions and need to be kind
Absolutely.
of encouraged
Correct.
quite strongly to do that. It's interesting
Absolutely.
to know, because I think if I think about our industry levels of replacement ratios, they're probably quite close to those, like 39 to 40% levels, which we obviously are working constantly to get people to improve.
Absolutely. Again, I could go more on this. I'll just do one more fact. If you earn half the average wage, you get a 70% replacement rate in Australia. So there is the safety net.
Okay. So the lower income earners are essentially more protected.
Correct. Protected.
Yeah. Okay. What could help improve Namibia's sustainability? Is a defined benefit structure ideal in isolation versus a cap combined with the defined contribution structure? So I think the question is, would it be better to go on a DB fund or have some portion of DB and DC? in Namibia, and would that improve their sustainability system? Tim, I think that might be for you. I don't know if you.
All right. Well, I go on the bigger picture. I can't comment. See, one of the things on this, defined benefit and defined contribution, one isn't better necessarily than the other. So, for example, if you had a defined benefit with a low accrual rate, that isn't as good, say, as a defined contribution with a higher contribution rate. You have to look at the package and the levels, not just how it's provided. It also depends on the defined benefit structure. What happens when you move jobs? Do you keep on that structure when it's linked or not? So the defined benefit, is it related to salary? Is it a fixed dollar amount, etc.? It's different. So
my experience within the Namibian market, they don't use life stage very commonly. It's in fact hardly used, but they do have an option prior to retirement to move to a more conservative portfolio. And that's usually a once-off decision. So you'd make that decision 3 or 5 years prior to retirement or any time in that period, and you would remain in that portfolio until retirement. Is that what is being referred to, or is it more related to post-retirement and purchasing that annuity?
It's the latter. It's post-retirement purchasing the annuity. So it's a great point you raise about the de-risking. Yes. These are really important parts of design. And what we're finding is that retirees are not as heterogeneous as people accumulating. Often when you're accumulating, it's about, can I get the biggest dollar or rand amount? When you're in decumulation, a lot of other factors come into this. Absolutely. Health, risk profile, how do I sleep well at night, etc. on this. It's all down to the education points you heard from Belinda before, financial literacy. It all comes in together.
Yes. Interestingly, Namibia does have a new legislation, the FIM Act, which is the Financial Institutions and Markets Act, which is imminent in terms of being implemented, and that will likely lead to a number of the reforms mentioned, even in terms of the integrity one that was brought up, which is private pensions having one independent member. So that will actually take care of that one, because that becomes some of the legislation there would cover that. So there may actually be an improvement for Namibian scores once the FIM Act comes into place. Another question from Namibia. Namibia designing suitable contributory schemes for informal sector workers is a massive challenge across Africa. That was a hard one. Can you mention any good examples in other developing countries where this might have been done successfully?
It's a great question, and it is a really big issue in some countries. I had the pleasure of talking to the regulators in India, which is the 52nd ranked system in there. So what's going on?
That's right.
And the informal sector is one of the biggest issues in India. So what I will do is, because I saw this question come up and it reminded me, there's innovation happening in Thailand that I reckon is wonderful. So there are many informal workers in Thailand. There's a big percentage of the population.
Yeah.
In Thailand, people like to gamble. It's almost a national pastime. And they have the national lottery. And what they're introducing is that if you buy a ticket in the lottery and you lose, your purchase price goes into retirement savings. That's where it goes to get you going, get you the micro saving and getting you into the habit of, I am with something for my retirement. I think that's wonderful. So the government is introducing that and expects it to be launched this year. So it's a way of getting the informal people. I'll buy a lottery ticket. It's done the way the system works in Thailand. The lottery is digital, so there's a way to connect. So they get it put together. And with that system, people will start having their own retirement saving pot. So there's a great example of innovation happening in a country with a large informal sector.
That is very interesting. Yeah, and maybe something we could potentially consider in some ways. So thank you for that. Okay, and there's quite a number of questions. We're going to have to cut it short at some point, but very quickly, what governance practices distinguish top-ranked pension systems, and which of those could realistically be adopted within Namibia's regulatory and institutional context? So I don't know, Tim, if you want to try and take that. Or if...
Sure. I will hit that. Remember, I am not the deep subject matter expert in Namibia. All I can go on is the answer to the questions that gave a lower score in those areas. So one of the ones for the governance there, I understand in Namibia, there's a difference when we do this between what best practice policy is and what a requirement is. So if there's a requirement to do something, you get marks. If it's best practice, you don't. Some people will, some won't. One of the ones coming through is that I understand there is no requirement for the plans to grant members access to the investment strategy and performance in Namibia. Now, if that's wrong or if there's actually a requirement, then if we know that, then we can recalibrate and take those into account for 2026. So there's an example of that.
Of low-hanging fruit. So I think those are things that may come through again in this format that may be implemented quite soon. But essentially what it's saying is members should have access to, for example, the investment policy statement of a fund. And I think if I think about a lot of the funds, that is written in the format. So most funds are now already making that part of the communications. Although at the moment, I believe it's more your member will need to request it rather than it just being available publicly. Okay, and then I think we may have to...
All right. I'm terribly sorry, but we have to also carry on with our own program here. A very interesting conversation. I hope you enjoyed it. Some key takeaways there for me is we can be incredibly proud of the Namibian pension fund system, and I see a lot of people in this room actually actively shaping that, so congrats on that, and hopefully some good tips on where we can improve to increase the lead even further. Now, for our next keynote speaker, Patricia Oliver, she is an accomplished executive with over 3 decades of experience across education, petroleum, and financial services. She holds a Bachelor of Science from the University of Cape Town, an Honours in Business Administration, an MBA, and a MPhil in Management Coaching from the University of Stellenbosch. Patricia spent 17 years at NAMCOR, advancing through senior leadership roles and driving major organizational initiatives, including structure redesign, strategy development, and establishment of a full HR function. She joined Old Mutual in 2011 as Human Resources Executive, where she transformed HR into a strategic business partner and strengthened performance management practices. She currently serves as executive for the corporate segment, contributing to strategic growth and client value. Patricia also served on several boards within and beyond Old Mutual, including Old Mutual Foundation, Orion Board of Trustees, the Social Security Commission, and Africa Leadership Institute. Please welcome Patricia to the stand.
I was wondering who Eckhart was talking about. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is quite an honor to stand here, and what a milestone for Namibia to be included in this baseline for us to say where we are in terms of pension funds. And it gives us a great opportunity to just build on from here. So thank you very much to Mercer, to CFA Institute, and to everyone who contributed to making this a reality for Namibia. And I think it's very pertinent now that there's lots of talks around what do we need to do. And I must say, when I heard this conversation, I thought about myself. I'm retiring in a few months' time. So adequacy, okay, I'm still a bit, I can still do a bit of work. And I thought to myself, maybe sustainability is more important for me, because I want to get something until I am no more. So, but what really struck me is the integrity of our system, which I really need to congratulate the governance side of it, that I know that whatever I get out is what I've put in. So that is really good on the Namibian side. But that is not what I am here. I am here to just talk quickly about the pension fund landscape in Namibia currently, and I thought that I'll just do it according to definitions as per the ILO and World Bank quickly. I only have 15 minutes, and I know Stephen will be looking at me because I shouldn't steal some of his time. He needs his time as well, so I'll quickly run through it. If you look at the ILO and World Bank models for pension provision, they have certain pillars, which I'll quickly run through, and just in terms of where Namibia sits. If you look at the models that the World Bank and ILO gives us, the pillar 0 is on the non-contributory social protection. It is also poverty alleviation that provides for minimum levels of benefit, and that is as per definition of these two organizations. The first, or pillar 1 then, so pillar 0 and pillar 1 is the contributing national Social Security Retirement Fund that seeks to replace a portion of income. And that is where we talk about this whole concept of the National Pension Fund that is sponsored by the state. This third tier, or pillar 2, will be the mandatory retirement provision, and that is usually done through the employers, sponsors, schemes and fund, and that is normally done by the private sector. On pillar 3 is the voluntary additional retirement savings that are usually flexible, and then pillar 4 is the informal, intra-family or intergenerational of both financial and financial support to the elderly. And I looked at all these, and the only pillar that is missing in Namibia is really pillar 1. So we have a little bit of all the pillars that is described by these two institutions. If you look at pillar 0, what we have is that, and I think as the CFA guy said, that is Namibia is one of the few countries who actually have a universal old age grant, and that everybody can actually participate in that. There is no discrimination, whether you Opa in Dongo or whether you have never worked before, you can get that social grant, which is known as the basic social grant. It's currently set at 1,600, and it really helps a lot of people for that income to reduce some poverty. I don't think it is doing a lot, but it helps. If you have some money, you can buy something. So that is very good. We look at this income grant. It can actually become substantial going forward, and there are several reasons why I say so. The first one is that we get more old people because of medical advances, because I think our population is aging, because once we retire, we go back to our roots, to the villages. There's no stress, and we live much longer. So that is why we can get older in Namibia. People don't get children that often anymore. I think we've become very westernized in terms of that. We look at careers first before we look at children. So that is the trend of the world these days. The third one is the absence of mandatory retirement savings. Because it's not mandatory, people can choose whether they want to participate in that. So people then don't save for retirement because there are so many other things that we want to buy with our money instead of retirement savings. And the last one is the high unemployment rate. I think that is something that is particularly prevalent in our youth. And I think as stakeholders of this, I think it is all our duties to do something about high employment rate. And together with government, we can do something, I believe. Pillar 1, as I said, is about the, and it's all about the, how do you establish the mandatory retirement savings. And that, we already have it in the Social Security Act of '94, which makes provision for the establishment of the National Pension Fund. But we also know that the National Pension Fund, as outlined through Section 7 of the Act, includes the contributions on retirement, disability and death benefits. And you can also then, an interesting thing that I picked up on the National Pension Fund, that the Pension Fund Act doesn't apply to the National Pension Fund Act. So that is interesting. So that means that it will not be regulated by NAMFISA. And then it's permitted to grant home loans to members. And the other one is employees who belong to a pension or provident fund under Section 4 of the may transfer their retirement benefits. If you belong to a pension fund, you can transfer it to the National Pension Fund. The second, we also know that National Pension Fund has been under discussion for quite a while with the ministry and with everyone. I think it's close to about 30 years or so that we've been discussing what is happening. There were extensive engagements, I think particularly the last few years as well, about what needs to be done with National Pension Fund. I think there's a lot of talks now again on the National Pension Fund. And then the ILO has also come in on the National Pension Fund. So throughout the years, there have been several models on the National Pension Fund that has been proposed. And I'll talk about one, the defined contribution model with a defined benefit underpin. I think the only defined benefit that I currently know, and I see Mr. Brits is here, is GIPF. I think the rest has now moved. Rossing is about to move out of defined benefit, and then the rest of the industry is under defined contribution models. So that was talked about at the National Pension Fund industry. And then recently, the past 2 or 3 years, is the International Labour Organization, who is actually looking at a more defined benefit model that requires all employees registered with Social Security to be part of this model. On the first model, there was an option for people who already belong to it that they can opt out of the National Pension Fund. But we will see what happens next. At the moment, as we gathered, the Ministry of Labour prefers the ILO model, so we'll have to see what the way forward is in the next few months, because they've also asked for a consultant so that they can look at how best to do it for Namibia. So we shall watch that space. The second, pillar 2, it's actually the third tier, It's really occupational retirement funds that have formed an integral component of the Namibian financial sector for more than 50 years. And that is where we get all the umbrella funds, all the standalone funds that's currently in operation in Namibia. And although it's not compulsory, as we said, it's not mandatory, many employers in Namibia actually make use of that because they feel it's a good benefit for their employees to make provision for retirement for their members. The benefits that is included there forms part of the remuneration package. And again, if I look at employees, they actually look at these type of benefits to make sure that when they retire or when something happens, that they are covered during these times. There are several tax incentives from the government side to really help people, to encourage people to save for pension funds. And these incentives that we currently have is the tax deductibility of employer contributions and employee contributions, the exemption of the retirement fund investment returns from tax, and then of course you can get your 1/3 tax-free when you retire, which I think is a great benefit. And then of course you pay on your 2/3, you pay tax. So I think it's a good incentive to really save for retirement. If you look at the current setup in Namibia, it's regulated by the Pensions Funds Act of 1956, which will soon be replaced by the Financial Institutions and Markets Act number 2 of 2021. And I think our speakers have also spoken about it in their talk, so I won't say too much about it. It is much more modern than the Pension Funds Acts, so I leave it at that, and we will see when it comes in how best we can comply. Because we need to comply with regulations. So we will do that. And then, of course, the Tax Act of 1981 also plays a critical role in governing retirement funds in our country. Quickly on Tier 4 and Pillar 3 is the retirement savings vehicles in Namibia. We have a pre-retirement product that we have. All of the insurance companies sell annuity products that you can use to when you retire. So in addition to retirement savings from pension funds, there's also the retirement annuities that can be done. Not too many tax incentive, limited in these products, but I think we're getting there. The flexibility of these annuity products is a bit of a challenge, I think, because you cannot, once you buy an annuity, it stays there. I think living annuity, you can still transfer to life annuity, but once you buy a life annuity, you're stuck with that insurer or that product that you've bought until death us do part. So that is not very flexible. And then the last pillar that we have in the Namibian setup is, I think it's just coming back to the grant that we get. And because of the financial assistance that government gives, I think it is part of Pillar 0 on the basic income grant, on Pillar 4, that a lot of that elders actually receive. And they actually help a lot of Namibians get by with their little 1,600 that they're getting. In conclusion, I just think the big thing for us is I think we have really done well for ourselves, and I think we've seen it here with the Mercer index. It's well regulated. And I didn't see this beforehand, so I agree it's well regulated. It's a resilient industry, and we have good legislation in place. We have a good level of participation in the retirement fund sector industry. And the good thing about this is government is looking after its people. Although we might not see it as a lot, they provide some social pension for everyone above 60 years old. The downside of it, I think we have to look at it, is that we need to expand our coverage in the retirement sector. We need to improve the adequacy, and that is what Tim said as well. We need to improve our net replacement ratio, and I'm sure Stephen will talk a lot about that. And then I think it all aligns with the Mercer findings, and although we have a C rating, I think next year we're going to move to a B rating, so we're going to be part of the developed country. So I'm looking forward to what Stephen has to say, what the panelists have to say, because the good thing is a variety of industry members that we have here, and so together as all stakeholders in the private sector, in government, we will win this battle of getting adequate pension for our elders. It will be sustainable with high level of integrity. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Patty. Yeah, that's a whole host of knowledge there, and I think we need to extend your retirement age to keep you in the industry. So thank you very much for that. And now let us welcome Stephen Walker, who will share some insights on the retirement fund structures in other African countries. Stephen is a consulting actuary with 26 years of experience, and he heads up Old Mutual's actuarial consulting team based out of South Africa. He has a passion for pension across Africa and consults to clients in several countries in Southern Africa. Stephen is the current chairperson of the Pensions Practice Committee within the Actuarial Society of South Africa, and is also an active member of the Society of Actuaries of Namibia. So put your hands together for Stephen.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here. I'm looking at my time, and my time seems to have been halved. Thank you, Patty. So I'm very excited about seeing this panel discussion. Therefore, I'm going to be tempted to talk very fast. And when I get excited, I speak very, very fast. So, Dorian, I'm going to ask Dorian there to please tell me if I'm talking too fast, say slow down. Thank you very much. So what I want to speak about today is to raise some points ahead of the panel discussion to talk about what are the sorts of issues that other African countries are struggling with when it comes to pensions. Because there's nothing unique here in Namibia or in South Africa, in Botswana, in Eswatini, Malawi, Zambia. We are all struggling with similar sorts of issues and similar thoughts of philosophical debates where how should we focus. So these are the top 12 that I think about. I've actually got a longer list, but I thought let me limit myself. And one of the big issues that came up that comes up continuously is looking after the elderly versus looking after the young. One of the points that they raise in this index, this annual pension report that I've been a fanboy of for many, many years, they talk about in South Africa we should be allowing the older people still to work so that they can also still sustain themselves. Now, 12 years ago, I was still living in the UK, and when I used to go to my local supermarket, I was in my 30s, and I go and I deal with a cashier who's in her 60s, so she's older than my mother at the time, and so I'm saying, Auntie, thank you. No, don't worry about packing the stuff, Auntie, thank you very much, because that's the norm there, that the older people are allowed to work, whereas here, in this part of the world, we've got massive, massive youth unemployment, where it's almost a concern, but the older people, they've had their time. If they didn't make proper provision, then they better hope that their children are rich or their children have got wealthy spouses because they've had their time. We need to look after the younger people. Where should the focus be? I'm a pensions actuary, so I focused on pensions, but I realized that someone else could argue differently. So non-contributory versus contributory benefits, for example, Patty spoke about that. I remember I was 29 years old. I was a qualified actuary for 3 years, and I was, in fact, the GIPF valuator at that time, when it finally hit me how important non-contributory pension benefits are. I always used to think they were a joke. I can remember being at university and doing a presentation about why people should save properly for retirement, because otherwise they're going to have to be supported by the state old age grant in South Africa, which is a joke. No one can live off that. 70% of our population, because it's means tested, unlike here in Namibia, 70% of our population lives off that state old age grant. And I had to first experience my wife's grandmother dying before I realized that she wasn't just being mourned as a beloved matriarch, she was being mourned because she was a breadwinner. She was raising grandchildren off a state old age grant, which for our informal sector in countries like South Africa and Namibia, that non-contributory pension is actually so important. And I see it, especially when I go to countries like Malawi, where there's nothing. It's nothing. You've saved for yourself, or your children are feeding you, or you die. Those are your options. There's no safety net there from the country. So even though I'm becoming more of a socialist the older I get, I keep saying by the time I retire I'm going to be a communist or something, but I keep thinking how important actually that social security net is there. So I don't have time to go through all these different issues, but these are the types of issues that people wrestle with. That informal sector versus formal sector especially. We come up with these great solutions for the formal sector. And in some of the African countries, the informal sector is 80%, 90% of the working population. Then it's not really all that great, is it, that solution that you've developed for the formal sector? So what is the perfect pensions model? There is no perfect pensions model. I'll cut to the chase, spoiler alert, that there is no, so each country continuously tweaks their pensions model and trying to improve outcomes, because you continuously have this iterative change process whereby you have to look at it and say, okay, we need to fix this, we need to fix that. In South Africa, we've been going through 12 years now of continuous change, for example, where we're still not there. We're not at that pensions nirvana that we heard about earlier. We have to keep going in order to improve what we're seeing for our people. Right, so you already saw this slide. This slide, when I've looked at it in more depth, the International Labour Organization and the World Bank, so when you go around Africa, you go around the world, you've got these two large international organizations that are advising governments. And they've got different focuses, they've got different priorities. Now, over time, the two different pensions models have moved closer and closer to each other. So after the Second World War, the ILO became the premier league sort of version of financial advisor when it came to pensions. So they would go around the world and they would advise countries' governments, and they still do this. In the 1980s, there was certain reforms in Chile, which I won't go into, which the World Bank picked up. And then in the 1990s, in 1994, the World Bank first launched their three-pillar pensions model. So that's why you'll see it starts at pillar 0. Originally had pillars 1, 2, 3. Then the ILO came out with their 4-tier model in 2000, before the World Bank then said, okay, well, you've got some points there, we'll change our model, and that 5-pillar model came out in 2004. So now they look very similar, besides the fact that the last tier or pillar that the World Bank has, which is about informal arrangements within the family, the ILO doesn't have that. The ILO's viewpoint is that should be a backup plan. You shouldn't be depending on that. That should just be like the last resort, that people are being fed by their families effectively. But still, the ILO's focus is more on the early tiers, whereas the World Bank's focus is on their later pillars. So the ILO focuses on state provision, that is the responsibility of the state to look after their people, versus the World Bank's focus is more on affordability and DC arrangements, what can we save towards. The ILO is a big believer in DB, big believer. When I spoke to we had a SAN event, Society of Actuaries of Namibia, and remember that ILO actuary, he said when they assess a pensions model around the world, if it's not DB, they don't count it. They just ignore it, which just blew my mind. All right, so I want to go through some of the examples then of African countries. So you're aware of Namibia, you're aware, I'm sure, of South Africa, of our pensions models. So I speak here about the non-contributory pensions. Botswana last year put through a massive increase in their pension, and they're putting through another big increase in their pension this year. Pensions and politics goes hand in hand, very clearly. So one of the actuarial students in my team, I was giving a speech recently to an actuarial student from a different team about how pensions and politics goes hand in hand. And he was saying, but Stephen, do I want to be a pensions actuary if everything is so political? Yes, because life is political. This depends. What we look at actually has a direct impact on people's lives out there. This is why it's so vitally important. So yes, we've got these non-contributory pensions. Botswana also, they want to reduce their pension age from 65 to 60 to be similar to South Africa and Namibia. They just can't afford that yet. They're pushing through big changes while their diamond prices and diamond mining income is reducing. So the new government has made promises that the income is sort of difficult to support, but they're trying to keep to those promises. In terms of the Tier 2, Pillar 1 national contributory schemes, so what I say repeatedly, and then Carmen at the back says, Stephen, are you crazy? When I talk about the fact that South Africa and Namibia, we already have these contributory national schemes. We've had them for many, many years. They just don't focus on retirement. So in Namibia, you've got these 3 different examples. In South Africa, we've also got the equivalents. The first one, MSD, would be UIF, ECF would be Compensation Fund, MVA would be Road Accident Fund in South Africa. We've already got these. Their focus is just not on retirement. Now, as the Actuarial Society, what we've said before is, but there's so much overlap actually between these contributory social security schemes that they should be consolidated into one social security department within government. The argument in South Africa, the argument in Namibia would be the same. But there seems to be a lot of kingdom and empire building going on where people don't want to hear that sort of thing. Like, no, we're going to look after this, and they will look after that. I'm in someone else's country, and I have to be careful what I say, because I still want to go back to South Africa today. But we've got these existing social security schemes. So my comment is always, but why don't we just take that and do something with that? Why do we want to reinvent the wheel and come up with something new and everything? But I need to be careful what I say. I look forward to the panel discussion. Nico can say stuff like that, and he can get into trouble, not me. The occupational funds we've spoken about, personal and voluntary retirement savings we've spoken about, so I need to move. So I'm going to go through some examples then of other African countries. Tanzania, or Tanzania I think is the correct pronunciation, is a country that's very focused on the socialist model. So they've got these 2 large contributory national social security funds that looks after the private sector versus the public sector. So in terms of non-contributory pensions, it's very early days. In Zanzibar, the one island, which is the one portion, they've got this universal pension that was introduced a few years ago. But in the mainland, they've got these pilot schemes that they're still busy rolling out. So in South Africa, we're very proud of the fact that we had the first non-contributory pension on the continent in 1928. We leave out the part that it was only in 1993 that we finally took out all the racial discrimination that had existed from 1928. So let's not forget that part. In other African countries, these are still being introduced. So Patty is completely correct when she says that Namibia is one of the few African countries that has a universal pension, in that there's no means test, and also it's already been expanded to the entire population. So in Tanzania, like I say, non-contributory pensions are still at very early stage. The national schemes dominate pension provision in the country, and there's very little space where the occupational funds actually operate because so much is looked after. If you can read a country that's put a lot of effort in, from what I can see, in looking after the informal sector, unlike some of its neighbors. Yeah, man, there we go. In contrast, Kenya, and I was very happy to hear about Kenya is going to be included now in this pension index for the first time in this 2026 report. The reports come out in middle of October, so I'm looking forward already to Kenya being included. Kenya has done a lot more to turn their pilot scheme for non-contributory pensions. Just before COVID, they turned it into an actual proper national scheme where everybody can claim that benefit. Also with their national scheme, they went through this interesting phase where they had a DC National Provident Fund for many years, and they were trying to convert this to something else. They were trying to remove the very, very low salary caps, and their own trade unions were the ones fighting the government for 10 years because they were saying, corruption, that's all the money's going to get stolen. Now, eventually, after 10 years, this was a couple of years ago, the government won these court cases, and they forced through these changes to the National Social Security Fund. So what's happening now is that everybody in the formal sector, on the private side in Kenya, has to contribute 6% employee, 6% employer. So first of all, up to what's going to be minimum wage, everybody must be in the DC pension fund that's operated at a national basis. Then from minimum wage up until 4 times national average earnings, they're not at these salary caps yet. They're busy phasing it in over time, because for many people this is the first time that they're now having to save for retirement. For many employers, they just didn't ever save for retirement. So the government is phasing this in. But you have to belong to the national fund up to minimum wage, and then above minimum wage up till 4 times national average earnings, you have to contribute either to the national fund or to an approved retirement fund. Now, call me biased, but I like that model, because if you don't believe in the private sector, you can go with the government solution. If you do believe in the private sector, you can shop around and you can choose something from the private sector. And again, like we heard about Patty saying, that if you're unhappy with a provider, you can change. You can take your money and move it over to someone else where you're going to hopefully get a better deal and be happier with the solution that's been provided for you. With Kenya also, they've done a lot in terms of looking after the informal sector. So they've designed products years ago, before we even started thinking about it here, where if you buy airtime for your cell phone, for example, if you need to phone your wife, you need to phone your wife. You're going to buy airtime. You're not going to worry about the price. So they would automatically load some of the price of buying airtime to go into a micro pension product, which was then designed to attract the informal sector. Sign up for this. And now when I tell this story, the Kenyans always say, oh no, Stephen, we've moved on from that long time ago. We've got all sorts of other enhancements about if you do your shopping, you can get a discount and you get some of it going into your pension savings. And also interestingly, in South Africa with 2 pots, we're very excited saying that, oh no, we introduced this great new concept. In countries like Kenya, they already had that concept before COVID. So already with the pension products designed for the informal sector, you've got this idea of some of the money is preserved for retirement and some of it is accessible. So in South Africa, what we did was just introduce an informal sector solution to the formal sector. So it wasn't that unique, if we have to be honest with ourselves. So Ghana is another interesting example where their non-contributory pension is still very much in its infant stage, pilot stage. And the Ghanaians that I talk to say, no, it's only the politically connected people whose families get the money, but I don't know about that. I haven't been to Ghana, so I can't comment on that. What they did was they were one of the early countries where they also had this Tanzanian-style monopoly when it came to national pension fund. And what they then did in 2008, it was finally actually put into practice in 2010, was that they freed up some of that. They said, all right, you can now contribute some of this. In fact, they made it compulsory. So as it says here, if you can read, 11% must go to the National DB Fund, 2.5% must go to national health insurance, 5% must go into an occupational retirement vehicle, 5%. And then over and above that, they also give tax deductibility to encourage occupational retirement funds to use another 16.5% so that employers would actually set up something that would encapsulate the 5% and do more than that. Then also what I find interesting in Ghana is that they're looking at the informal sector. So as well as having these micro pension products, what we see in a lot of African countries is that the government gets involved. They don't leave it up to the private sector. They at least start the initiative, and then sometimes they will hand it over to the private sector afterwards, where they set up an industry fund for cocoa workers, and they said, right, for every $5 that you pay in, we'll give $1. This was actually first started in Thailand. So Thailand first introduced that concept. So I was very interested to hear about the gambling. We've done research in South Africa which showed that 30-40% of the money that's coming out of 2 pots withdrawals is going into gambling. It's like it's a good time to buy shares in gambling houses in South Africa because they're making a lot of money. So I thought that's a great concept. If you're taking some of the gambling money, putting that into a pension product, I'm just going to repeat that when I get home to South Africa. But Ghana, what they did was that for the first time, they started subsidizing contributions by informal sector workers. Now, we in the formal sector, we have this view. If I pay contributions into a pension fund, it must be tax deductible. I have that right. I must benefit. But what about the informal sector? Why should the informal sector also not benefit from the fiscus? So it's adding that argument to say, should we encourage people to save towards their retirement by giving them some sort of a subsidy from tax that government is receiving? Nigeria is another interesting country for me because it's the largest population and it's gone 100% capitalist, 100% capitalist. So in 1994, they set up this partially funded DB pension model and people weren't complying with it. It was largely unfunded. It was running a big deficits. And in 2004, they just killed it. They just killed it. End of story. Not phasing out, nothing. It was dead. And they then introduced this requirement that everybody in the formal sector, so in Australia, they took a long time to phase in this increase in contributions up to 12% minimum. In Nigeria, they said, if you're in the formal sector, you as an employee pay 7.5%, you as an employer pay 7.5%, 15% minimum total. Boom. That was 2004. In 2014, they came back and they said, okay, now it's 8% employee, 10% employer, 18% minimum. Now, in South Africa, I can tell you, we would love this. As industry, we would flip and love this, where you can't even access more than 25% of your savings unless you can show that you've been unemployed for more than 4 months. And even when you're retiring, the requirement in Nigeria is very different, where you have to be able to show that you can, with your pension savings, you can purchase a pension that's going to replace at least 50% of your salary at retirement. Then if you've still got something left over, you can take that out as cash. So it's not about 50%, 1/3, how much can you, it's what sort of pension can you get, because this is supposed to be for retirement income. So it was also coming through from that presentation we had right in the beginning about focus on retirement income. How are we replacing people's income in retirement? So the Nigerian example, like I said, what they've struggled with, however, in Nigeria and in Ghana is actually compliance. So it's one thing to put in a rule, it's another thing to ensure that people are complying. So Nigeria, for example, the federal government is compliant. The larger employers are compliant. But when you start getting down to the regional governments and to the smaller employers, then compliance really doesn't work. And Ghana has also had similar experience. So it's one thing to have these requirements, it's another thing to actually see it implemented. And in fact, in Nigeria, when they originally went from the 2004 reforms to the 2014 reforms, part of the 2014 reforms is that they said if you even have 3 employees, you must put them into a contributory pension scheme. Because what employers in Nigeria started doing was they would break up their companies into smaller groups so that they could be exempt. Oh no, we've only got 10 people, so we don't have to pay contributions. So if you had 30 people, you break them up into 3 little companies so that you can then avoid having to save for retirement. If people can find a way to avoid, I always say pensions is a grudge purchase. People get excited about their new car, their new house, their new cell phone. No one runs around with his benefit statement saying, look at my pension savings. No one, because we don't get excited about, oh, okay, I must do it. If we can find a way to do that. So Zambia is a country that I've looked at many times because of the fact that this ILO model is what exists in Zambia. So in Zambia, if you're in the formal sector, and again, formal sector is quite small compared to the size of the informal sector, where it's 70–80% of people work. But in the formal sector, they've got NAPSA, which is the DB National Pension Fund that was introduced in February 2000. And everybody has to belong to that fund, unless they are exempt and they belong to the Public Service Pension Fund. You contribute 5%, up to a salary limit, which is again based on 4 times national average earnings. And this is the standard ILO model, which targets a 40% replacement ratio. It works well in Zambia because Zambia's median average age is 17. So because the population is young, they haven't had that pressure on a national DB pension fund. In a country like Ghana, where the median age is more like 22, 23, they've got more pressure, where their actuaries are saying that their contribution rate, that 11%, needs to increase. It's not enough. So what we see is that in certain African countries, the aging effect is coming through sooner rather than later. So Africa has got the youngest population. Our median age across the sub-Saharan African portion is about 18, 19 years of age. In Namibia, it's about 23, 24. In South Africa, it's about 25, 26. In a country like Tunisia, it's probably close to 40. In a country like Japan, it's actually 50. Half their population is aged over 50. So it's besides Monaco, where all the old rich people live, where their average age is 57, Japan has got the oldest age by average. So you would have read about this continuously, about that aging population. So it's an issue around the world. So in Europe, for example, the average age is 42. So it's not seen as much of a problem here, but it is. It's just a problem in 30 years' time, in 40 years' time. So in Zambia, for example, the actuaries are saying your contribution rate should be stable until 2050. So it's now 2026. When I was in school in 1995, I thought, okay, 2026 is a long time away. I remember when I was a student talking with my colleagues at the place where I was working, and it was a department, Old Mutual, and we're like, imagine when it's 2015, eh? Imagine when we got the flying cars and how different everything's going to be, because that's 19 years, that's still far. And now I'm turning 49 on Sunday. Time flies. We're going to wake up and we're in that future. So instead of ignoring the lessons and the pain that other countries have suffered, we should rather keep this in mind. What do we do in terms of changing demographics? I think this is, yeah, I'm coming to the end soon. So for Malawi, I always look at the example of Zambia and Malawi that sit next to each other. So I was in Malawi November last year, and at an old mutual event, but the gentleman from the Reserve Bank, who's basically the regulator, was speaking, and I was appreciating it so much. So again, very large informal sector. They've got compulsory contributions, 10% employer, 5% employee. So in South Africa, in Namibia, we would love to have this requirement. And yet in Malawi, they only have about 67% compliance, he said. They don't have the teeth. So again, it's the larger employers, the medium-sized employers are compliant. But even when you have these requirements, how many of your people, your companies, your employers, especially on the smaller side, are actually complying? And again, they've had this dream of having a national fund, a DC national fund that gives options to opt out of the private sector if you want this cheaper government-provided solution. They've got an equivalent in the UK called Nest that I can talk about if I had more time. But if you want that, they want to be able to provide that as government. They just haven't had the money to set it up yet. So it's still coming down the line in terms of Malawi, what they want to do. What we've also seen across the range, I should say, is that there's been different movements in terms of preservation versus access. I can remember years ago when I was in Mauritius at a pensions conference, and I was talking about the fact that at that time we were still allowing 100% cash withdrawal benefits on exit. And these guys were absolutely mind blown. They were like, you let your people take 100% in cash? Yes. So they just take their money and they spend it? Yes. And then they got no money? Yes. Yes, you see the problem. It's actually unusual. In a country like Malawi, they've always had compulsory preservation. I find it strange that countries in this region, we've had different preservation rules just by accident, it seems like. Botswana has had these strong compulsory preservation rules that they've loosened over time. We've introduced compulsory preservation sort of scalumpies through the side in the form of two pots because people just focus on the 1/3. They don't actually think about the 2/3 that they're not allowed to take out until retirement. In a country like Malawi, your employer contributions and interest must be preserved until you retire, and your member contributions, they changed it from 6 months to 3 months during COVID. You must be unemployed and be demonstrating that you're unemployed for a minimum period of time before you can access your member contributions plus interest. Zimbabwe, I can remember, has got similar rules, but the point is that from a South African or Namibian perspective, this boggles our mind. We would never accept that. Our people would be like, no, it's my money, give me my money, I need my money now. But it just adds to the fact that there is no social security net in Malawi. So you give the people some money in that form, but a lot of it you're holding on to. One of the things that we got ourselves into trouble as members of the Actuarial Society, where I had my own employer and fellow actuaries shouting at me, was even about the retirement pot in 2 pots. We have a feeling that we all are big believers in compulsory preservation of this 2/3. But eventually, when someone exhausts all their social security benefits and the guy's living in the street, surely you should just give him his retirement pot money. What's the point of hanging on to it? His children are sick, his wife's going to leave him because he can't feed the children. She's got a sugar daddy down the road, she's going to move there. I'm a marriage officer in my church. I'm like, just give the man his money. Let him save his marriage. Let him look after his children. Whereas industry are much bigger believers in, no, if there's a rule, you must stick to the rule. So again, that idea of flexibility is a matter of debate. But like I said, I'm going to end a little bit early because I'm really looking forward to the panel discussion. So thank you very much, everybody, for your time.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Very insightful. Bason, you're up next. You will lead the panel discussion. So just by means of introduction, Bason is also a member of the local CFA chapter and by day Chief Investment Officer at Sanlam Allianz Namibia, where he leads the organization's investment strategy, portfolio performance, and has a multi-billion-dollar asset base he's looking after. He's got 15 years of experience in financial services and a strong track record in investment leadership, liquidity, and balance sheet management. Since joining Sanlam in 2012, He has played a central role in shaping investment products, driving commercial outcomes, and strengthening risk and governance frameworks. Bason's experience spans multi-asset class, portfolio management, client-mandated solutions, and unlisted Namibian assets, alongside extensive engagement with boards, trustees, pension funds, corporates, and state-owned entities. Before Sanlam Allianz, he worked at PwC Cape Town as an assistant manager in the financial services assurance. Bason is a CFA and a CA, SA and Namibia, and studied at Stellenbosch University, which is also very good. Thank you very much.
All right, Eckhard, thanks a lot for that great introduction. Really do appreciate it. Now I feel under a lot of pressure. So I've got the great honor to lead the panel discussion. So I'll do a quick introduction. I'll call out the panelists and quickly introduce them to you. Then I've got some prepared questions. While we talk, please think about some questions. We'll have a few mics roaming around. You can ask questions. Also, we've got a line in the back. So let's make it interactive and keep it very interesting. So benefits have become a hot topic in Namibia recently, with news of the report that the Social Security Commission has been instructed to implement the National Pension Fund by the 1st of April. Just over 3 years ago, a draft regulation in the Financial Institutions and Markets Act, FIMA, raised some controversy, as largely owing to the requirement that retirement fund members will be required to preserve 75% of their retirement benefits with withdrawal from an employer-sponsored retirement fund. This event, which celebrates Namibian inclusion to the Mercer CFA Institute's Global Pension Index, provides a useful opportunity to discuss some of the developments in our retirement industry. I'm privileged to moderate the panel discussion that forms the last part of our agenda this morning. We have some distinguished guests and experts in our panel, and I'm looking forward to hearing their thoughts on some of the topical issues related to our retirement fund industry. Can I please call up the 4 panelists? I want to really introduce the 4 panelists. So, Lovisa Indongwe Namanje, I'm really glad to introduce her, and she has worked in the non-bank financial supervisions for 18 years. She's the General Manager of Pension Funds and Friendly Societies at AMFISA, the non-bank financial supervisory authority in Namibia. Lovisa holds a B. Juris and LLB degree from the University of Namibia, an MSc Criminal Law from Cardiff University, an MBA from Stellenbosch University, and is a mattered legal practitioner in the High Supreme Court of Namibia. She is a member of the SADC Committee of Insurance, Securities and Non-Banking Financial Authorities, SISNA, the Subcommittee on Insurance, Retirement Funds, Medical Schemes, and Intermediate. Good morning. Martinez Fabianis. Martinez is a Managing Director of RVS Financial Services and can rightly be considered amongst the captains of Namibia retirement funds industries. He served the retirement funds and insurance industry for over 30 years with passion, participating in various national dialogues and forums in the sector. Martinez is a Namibian University of Science and Technology NUST graduate with an MBA and a Bachelor's in Business Administrations. He completed the Leadership Executive Development Program of the University of Stellenbosch and acquired a socio-macroeconomic policy certification, which he attained and attended at the renowned ILO International Training Center in Turin, Italy. Martinez served on the boards of one of the biggest umbrella funds in Namibia, the Benchmark Retirement Fund, for over 20 years, is a board member of the leading fund administrator. He served on the board of Social Security Commission of Namibia, SSC, and was president of the Retirement Fund Institute of Namibia, RIFIN. A mentor and aspiring farmer, Martinez is a respected figure and dedicated family man. Thank you. Then I'd like to introduce Nico Smit. Nico is the principal actuarial consultant to the I3 Actuaries. He graduated from the University of Stellenbosch in 1999 with an honours degree in actuarial science, following which he commenced his career in the actuarial department of Jacques Milan Consultants and Actuaries. During his time in Jacques Milan Consultants and Actuaries, he has been involved in a wide array of actuarial disciplines. Nico has also extensive experience in the healthcare, actuarial feed, and life insurance industry. Nico is accredited head of actuarial function and statutory actuary for life insurance companies. Nico has served in a variety of management positions with Jacques Milan Consultants and Actuaries and was appointed the Chief Executive Officer in 2010. He was a member of the team that facilitated the merger between NMG and Jacques Milan Consultants and Actuaries. Following the merger, which took place on the 1st of January 2013, Nico decided to pursue a new career, focusing on consulting to clients and he has decided to join the True South African Actuaries with effect 1 November 2013. He gained further consulting experience during his time in South Africa Actuaries, and he established I3 Actuaries Consultants at the end of 2014, which operates in Namibia and South Africa. Lastly, but not least, definitely, I'd like to introduce Sabrina Jacobs Halumbe. Sabrina is a seasoned human capital organization development and governance professional with leadership experience in the Namibia retirement fund industry. She currently serves as the human capital head GM at CIMOT and is director of the Retirement Funds Institute of Namibia, RIFIN. Sabrina government portfolios include serving as a trustee and chairperson of the NHP Board of Trustees, independent trustee of the Benchmark Retirement Fund, and principal officers of the ex-CIMOT Pension Fund. Sabrina has contributed to the policy conversations in the sector, and through her leadership roles in RIFIN and involvement in pension fund governance across various institutional environments, Sabrina has also contributed to the national labour and employer discourse through involvement in Namibia Employers Federation ad hoc committees and contributing to key employer advocacies. She holds a human resource and labour relations qualifications from Nelson Mandela University, is currently pursuing a master's degree in leadership and change management at NUST. Sabrina combines strategic leadership with practical governance. Experienced and her expertise spans human capital strategy, organizational development, labor relations, and the full human capital value chain. She's committed to contributing and strengthening the Namibia retirement fund ecosystem, that people-centered, future-focused, and particularly in a world of rising longevity, shifting demographics, and evolving workforce needs. So can I please ask for a quick hand on this great panelist that we've got today.
Thank you. Is it on? Yeah, great. So I'm going to start off with a few questions that we've prepared. And again, I've said is once we've done 4 or 5 questions, I'd like to open to the floor. Please get your questions ready. I think it's very few opportunities you get a great set of expertise in a panel like this together to have this national discourse and have a discussion. So please, I ask you to use it and also online to send in your questions. So Nico, if I can ask, let's start with you, please. Namibia was rated in C in the Global Pension Fund Index with the following actions to be proposed. Increasing the labour force participation rate for those working age and to increase the number of people with a retirement savings plan. Secondly, introducing a minimum level of mandatory contributions to the retirement savings. And increasing the level of household savings and reducing the household debt. And lastly, increasing the level of home ownership. One that stands out as very topical at the moment in Namibia is to introduce the minimum level of mandatory contributions into retirement savings. You know, what do you think will be the best way to implement this?
In my view, and I think Patty discussed it a little bit earlier, was with the National Pension Fund, obviously the structure of the National Pension Fund is very much aligned with the purposes of increasing coverage and mandatory contribution. But as Patty said, and it's been under discussion for about 30 years, since I've been involved in Namibia, which started, I think, in 2001, I've been part of those discussions as well. So I think, from my perspective, the best way to do it is to actually start with something, not to. The National Pension Fund is a grand project. It's a large project. It has a significant impact, even on a macroeconomic level. My view would be to start somewhere. As the index has shown, Namibia has a retirement fund system that's with a high level of integrity, and I think the best way would be to utilize that system to start somewhere. I think there's that very famous saying about the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. The next best time is today. Now, applying that in a retirement fund industry, imagine 25 years ago, there was some sort of mandatory contribution even at a small level. Just imagine the accumulated assets that we would have had today if it started somewhere. I think there's also a further benefit in Namibia in that the basic grant doesn't have a disincentive to save. In South Africa, there's a means test. So if you do save up to a certain level, you're not going to get the grant. So there's a disincentive to save, which is not the case in Namibia. So in my view, the best way to do it is to start at some level of compulsion. I think the lowest hanging fruit is probably formally employed people. There's been some discussion on getting informal people into the system as well, and start at a relatively low level. We don't need to start with 10% or 15 or 20% contributions. Start at 5% or even slightly lower than that. I think the challenge to the industry is to create a system or a mechanism where people can start saving small amounts of money in a cost-efficient manner.
And sort of looking back to our presentation this morning from Namibia, that we're on the cusp of really moving up, a step in the rating. Do you think that'll be the easiest one to sort of put these little incremental changes, and that's the one we should be focusing on rather than having this one blanket national pension fund?
Yes. So I think doing incremental things is always better than planning something grand, because planning something grand takes ages. It takes very long time to actually implement it. We've had, Stephen also mentioned, compliance in some of the other countries where they do have compulsion is not great. People find ways around complying with these, call it grand schemes. So I think in terms of the sustainability measure, that would be my suggestion for the first step. And then secondly, it's been under discussion as well, is the compulsory preservation. I think it is absolutely necessary to do it. It is currently quite a hot topic in Namibia. But again, start at some place. You don't necessarily need to say we're going to start at a grand level. You can say, let's start at some level of preservation, and then over time you build it up. That makes people used to these interventions as well.
Thanks. Martinez, if I can ask you the next question. The other actions that are proposed is to reduce the unemployment rate, increase household savings, home ownership, and decrease household debt. What contribution can the retirement fund industry make towards achieving these, without undermining our long-term savings?
Thank you. It sounds like an economic question, and I'm not an economist. But I think the buzzword today that we've had is innovation. So innovation will be required to be able to increase employment. And here I'm thinking that we rather need to look at future-proof retirement saving or income solutions. And one of the best ways of doing that is to obviously look at how pension funds monies are invested. And we've got regulations that set out how pension fund investments are supposed to be made, and specifically in unlisted investments. I'm thinking some of the floors that are in place, for example, can probably be looked at. The ceilings that are in place as far as unlisted investments are concerned, I think they must probably be lifted, I would argue. That way, and we would have heard that also from Tim, that when you give a bit of freedom to investors of pension fund monies, they tend to do a lot better in terms of the returns that they can generate, and they can therefore invest in productive assets once they've got a bit of freedom in as far as unlisted investments are concerned. That's for employment creation. Now, for savings and for reducing debt, I think there's an inverse relationship between encouraging savings and reducing debt at the same time. And where we have heard that Namibia has got some labor and income demographics where, for example, the low income levels would make it very difficult to save at household level, especially during the short term. Now, pension funds are long-term investments, and therefore we've also heard that it's probably better to educate members of pension funds and also people at household level to be able to know better as to how to maintain a good balance between saving and lowering debt during the short term, and then investing for the betterment of their lives in the long term. As far as housing is concerned, I think we've also heard that the National Pension Fund does allow, similar to the existing Pension Funds Act, for investments in housing, but also for members to be able to borrow some of their retirement savings to be able to use that towards building houses or investing in their houses. So pension funds can definitely be used as well to assist with reducing the level of housing, the challenges that we have with housing in Namibia, and housing has been indicated as a national problem, so pension funds can be used also to assist with that problem. So that's what I would say would be the things to look out for. Thank you.
Maybe then, and do you think us as a pension fund industry, we're doing enough? Is there more we should be doing, involved in discussion, involved with regulatory, involved with implementation? Sort of what's your feeling where we're going? I think, compared on the rating, I think we are, for a South African country in the world, we're doing quite well. But do you think we as an industry are sort of driving these improvements and these suggestions enough?
Yeah, I think it's an important point. It's a national dialogue that we will need to have. I am aware that NASIA, as the body that looks out for investors, I think it is important to definitely encourage national dialogue. The ways that would make the best sense for Namibia, having heard that Namibia is a unique country, we do need the domestic savings to be able to obviously create local industries for job creation. But at the same time, it is also important to be able to make sure that we balance the investments with the returns of those people who own those assets, so that at the end of the day we are able to generate the best returns for those. And the best way to do that is to give a bit of freedom in terms of how those assets are invested.
Thank you, Martinez. Lovisa, if I can ask you the next question. Namibia scored a B for integrity, which covers regulation, governance, protection, communications, and operating costs. What has contributed towards Namibia's success in this area?
We on? Thank you for the question. I think what has contributed is we've been at this for a very long time. We've been doing it since 1956. We've had a structure in place. We have had a system in place. We've allowed it to stagnate, but we've had a system and a structure that's formalized in place. And it might be surprising to know that it's not a common thing for a country, even in what used to be called Eastern Europe and Latin America, and even the US. All their models, or some of them you can't even call models, some of you would say it's like just savings vehicle that they have. It is not that common for a country to have a formalized retirement system. So I think that early start has served us well.
And do you think we need these large sweeping changes? How would you think the best way to go implement? Because I agree, I think we've, compared to the rest, we've got incredibly good, integrity and regulation in place. But these incremental changes, how do you sort of see that dialogue go forward? And I know it's a different question, but it's really great to have sort of a diverse panel and, hearing from your side. And I think we're really looking to take big steps, with FIM coming in, with discussion around the National Pension Fund dialogue. So your view, sort of the best way to implement these sort of really large changes sort of in our regulated environment?
Let me maybe take it from this angle. As I've said, we've let our 1956 framework stagnate. If you just look at our 1956 Act, which was identical to the South African Act in 1956, and you look at what the South African Act looks like now and what our 1956 Act still looks like. So it might seem like a big change, but also most of these changes are changes that industry has evolved to. Now we moved from DB to DC, so we need to adjust the framework. So some of the changes are not really changes. They are adjusting to what we are now currently doing. I understand on a compliance, because right now it's voluntary. If a fund has chosen to have member representation on its board of trustees, it's a choice. There is no compulsion to do so. What FEMA brings is tries to bring everybody up to those forerunners in our industry who have voluntarily chosen to run their funds in a way that adheres to good corporate governance, as an example. There are funds who have established audit and risk committees, they have documented risk policies that have documented member engagement policies that they follow. And what we're trying to do is to bring everybody up to speed with those forerunners in our industry. So I don't think there are any surprises in the FIMA changes.
All right, thank you so much for the great answer. Sabrina, if I can ask you, the Global Pension Index recommendations, they do not specifically refer to the controversial topic of preservation. Do you believe that introducing some form of mandatory preservation will improve Namibia's standing in the Global Pension Index? What other potential behavioral structural interventions could we be looked at?
Thank you for the question. I think it's a very targeted and direct question. And if I were to answer it directly, if I look at the sub-indices of adequacy and sustainability, I think some sort of mandatory preservation on mass level could definitely perhaps increase our ratings in those sub-indices, because we're speaking about growth of assets and the size of assets as well, and the participation on that level. However, I don't believe, in my view, that it would happen automatically. We obviously have a very high integrity score, and perhaps moving up to the next level, movement for Namibia upwards to probably C+ or B might probably lie in that area. But when I look at preservation purely as what it's intended, mandatory, I don't believe that we need to look at other aspects as well. We're looking at, in our country where we have 36% of our employed population, because of this voluntary contribution aspect, who don't have access to a pension fund arrangement and who voluntarily subscribe out of it. And I think maybe that's where more movement can happen if we have more labor market participation. Because in my view, our pension funds is a mirror of our labor market participation. And I think perhaps maybe the answer lies there, to look at increased coverage, and also speaking on preservation, looking at leakages that happen as a result of preservation and access to withdrawals. If we can close those loopholes, then perhaps we can see an increase.
Thank you. It seems to be that it only really becomes national dialogue once it becomes sort of highlighted in a very specific item. My question is really, what do you think as industry, what should we be looking at to try and, they change the discussion and really improve that sentiment, and then getting the thinking through that we need a strong savings, we need a preservations, we need to save for retirement. What do you think we can really do as Namibians to really drive that dialogue and that change, and not have a tweet sort of suddenly change the direction of our discussion?
For me, preservation has sort of become a swear word, if you think about it now. We had this big public outcry in 2023 when the regulations were made public. And I think it's like Stephen said, preservation is viewed as it's mandatory in terms of the intention of pension funds, because retirement fund vehicle is not meant to be your savings that you just dip into. If we look at it from an accessibility point of view, in my mind, we should change our mindset in terms of thinking of retirement funds as accessible pool of money. There are other savings vehicles that we can look at that can fund, immediate emergencies. But I think because of our general perception of what a retirement fund is and its intention, and the fact that we have allowed non-preservation or early withdrawal over time, it has kind of shot us in the foot. But the nation is telling us, leave my money alone, it's mine. If I want to use it now, I want to use it now. And as someone who's worked in HR, I've sort of felt the brunt of that, on ground level. And we experience it when a member changes jobs or experiences some financial pressures, and they use their retirement fund savings as a buffer to sort of cater for that. And I find that, financial literacy and member education can assist with that. I mean, having a one-on-one conversation, as and when the withdrawal happens is very helpful. I've had conversations with employees, maybe for a 20 or 30 minute session, just explaining to them, look, this is the impact that you will see over time should you withdraw right now. And I can say maybe from a conversion rate, if I can think about it, maybe 2 out of 3 people I've convinced not to take their pension, right? And, you know, looking from a long-term perspective, you know, it's a short-term financial decision that you make that impacts your long-term dignity from a financial point of view. There's a lot of things that we can look at. I mean, for me, the basket is full. There's also in terms of, you know, looking at, like I said, economic participation. We have SMEs and the informal sector that are not participating. It's not mandatory for them. But we need to find innovative ways in terms of how to get them into the pension funds arrangements and how to make that mandatory without it seeming that it's a punishment. Because at the moment, preservation is, the thinking is that preservation is a form of control, right? But in my mind, preservation is actually on a national level. It's a fiduciary responsibility that we have as trustees, as principal officers, and custodians and stakeholders of pension funds.
Thank you, definitely agree. Nico, if I can direct the next question to you again. You know, the area in which Namibia scored the lowest is sustainability. You know, which measured by pension coverage, total assets, demographic, public expenditure, government debt, and economic growth. Now, despite this being our lowest score, we still fared better than Botswana and South Africa, as well as several of the first world countries who are grappling with the demographic challenges. What do you think are the greatest threat in your view, you know, to sustainability of the Namibia retirement fund systems, and which policies do you think could be addressed to change this the quickest?
In my view, the biggest threat at the moment to sustainability, which obviously talks to effectively money being available for retirement fund. The moment you have high public debt, high public expenditure, taxes tend to be high, and people just don't have money for especially in the voluntary environment, people just don't have money for retirement savings. And I think in addition to that, and we've seen a lot of these challenges continuing in Namibia over the past couple of years. We're not seeing significant economic growth, so we're not seeing more money being created that people can improve the sustainability. I think in addition to that, almost a new threat that's emerging is the crowding out of voluntary retirement fund savings. There's just so many other priorities that are emerging that people want to spend money on. Stephen mentioned it earlier, two-part, the withdrawals. I think a very large portion of that is going towards gambling. So online gambling in South Africa is a massive, massive problem. So you get so many people trying to go after the same pot of money. And some of them are a lot more immediate, whereas retirement fund, just by its nature, is you extend that gratification. So I see that as probably the biggest threat emerging from the current position. And in terms of addressing that, it is unfortunate that as a whole, people don't have sufficient discipline to save for retirement. And from a policy perspective, I think the changes that would have to come in is some sort of compulsion. Because unfortunately, I think the population in general has not had the ability to set aside sufficient amounts of money to fund their retirement.
No. Thank you so much. Lovisa, if I can direct the next question again to you, please. You know, the previous Global Pension Index report proposed that South Africa introduce both a compulsory preservation and annuitization. You know, do you think that Namibians were likely to be amenable to compulsory annuitization at retirement?
Well, I think that's an easy one. We have so annuitization is a retirement. How much of it do you use to buy income in retirement as opposed to taking it lump sum? We have about 420,000 membership. We have about 63,000 that are in Provident. So it means about roughly 15% is currently able to now take 100% commutation. It means the rest of us are annuitizing at least the 2/3. So maybe it's a question of how much Should that then change to, let's say, 100% annuitization? That might be a difficult one to sell as an immediate change. But I think that the system has matured in the expectation that we all expect to annuitize 2/3. I personally would like to see that higher, but yeah, I don't think it will be such a culture shock or that will flare the resistance to change.
Thank you so much. I'm really glad to hear that, the possibility. Martinez, you said that the previous was the economics one. I might try and change this around a bit. But during your presentation, Patty noted, that Namibia does not currently have a Pillar 1 retirement saving mechanism. And this will change by the launch of the envisaged National Pension Fund. But what do you think are the likelihoods that such a commission is achieving this goal in April? And from your perspective, what impact will this fund have on Namibia? Socially, economically, broader retirement landscape. What is your view?
More economic questions. Did you say by April? As long as it's not on the 1st of April. Yeah. I don't know what are the possibilities of Social Security implementing it by 1 April. I would probably say that's more like an April Fool's joke. But I think we've definitely seen in the papers that there is some planning that is going on, and what is the impact going to be? Socially, for people who are not contributing anything, suppose they are in formal employment, and if they were forced to contribute because they are formally employed, over the long term it will definitely have great social outcomes for them. I mean, if you were to save for retirement, it's better to, they say there's no worse fool than a poor fool, so to speak. If you are old and you don't have money, I think that compounds your situation. So if you are in formal employment, it's only fair that in one way or the other you are forced to provide for yourself so that you are not a burden on the state. In the initial stages, it's obviously going to be very difficult. I think somebody mentioned that it will have to be phased in gradually, because if you are not used to putting away some of your money for long-term use, and you're probably using that into life expenses and what you have, you'll have to find a way of adjusting your lifestyle. So that's going to be painful in the initial stages, and therefore it will have to be phased in over time. Economically, I think if you just consider that there's over 400 people, from what Lovisa just mentioned, 400,000 people that are currently contributing to existing schemes. If you look at the contribution rates that have been mentioned, something like 16% of salary, whatever that salary is going to be, I think the ceiling that I have seen is 15,000. How many of us can really afford to contribute, although it is shared between employer and employee? How many of us can afford to contribute another 16%? The government alone contributes to GIPF about 16%, if I'm not mistaken. So government will be required to answer the question whether they can afford to double those contributions, or whether they will have to make up their mind between the GIPF and the National Pension Fund. Is the National Pension Fund going to provide better benefits? We have seen that the replacement ratios that they are talking about is something like 40%. So the former actuary of GIPF is here. Maybe he can tell us what was the replacement ratio, retirement replacement ratio that GIPF is targeting. I would like to believe it's a lot higher than 40%. So I don't think it will go down well economically, and I think once people are forced in a situation where they have to give up one in favor of the other, or not in favor but forced to give it up in any event, there is definitely going to be some major economic impact. People probably be forced to decide what to do with the money that they've accumulated in occupational pension funds. So those pension funds will probably have to be disbanded, or what's going to happen? Would you then be required to have access to your money, or will you be forced to basically preserve your money? And that is the difficult conversation that I think Sabrina was referring to earlier. But there's definitely going to be an impact, the severity of which will be determined depending on the design that the National Pension Fund will come up with. And the design which is less accommodating and that does not take into account the current contributions to existing arrangements that seems to have been working very well over the past 50 years, I'm hearing. I thought it was just 30 years. I'm hearing it's over 50 years already that these systems have been in place. If that were to be disbanded, I think it's going to have a major impact. I think most of us would be aware the role that the pension fund assets paying over 100% of the GDP have been playing for the Namibian economy in terms of even stabilizing our currency, just in terms of helping us to use some of the domestic savings for our industries here, and then also being able to export some of that money across the borders and therefore improving our exchange rates. So I think it's definitely going to have a hell of an impact, and it will be important that we have a proper conversation regarding the design that Social Security will decide on. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthias. I'm just conscious of time. Do we have any questions from the floor or online? Is there anybody that would like to maybe raise a question to any of the panelists? I know either Stefan and Patty, I can put you on the spot and call you up if maybe there's a question, because we don't have any time allowance after your presentations. You're more than welcome to ask them as well. Do we have a question from the floor? All right. Eloise, you're just the mic's on the way.
Hi. Most people who know me probably think I don't need the mic. But I kind of have two things that I would like the panel to comment on. The first is our life expectancy in Namibia is 68 years. So you can understand why someone would, even if you educate them, would say, listen, I'm going to live for 3 more years after I retire. So what is this long term that you are talking about, right? That is the first thing. And then just in terms of what Martinez also now spoke about, the this compulsory contributions that need to be made. How are we thinking about the interplay between Namibia's dire need for more employers, right? We need more businesses. We need more people to become employers, and making it, in a sense, every single time we put in something like this, more difficult to be an employer. Just another requirement, another regulation, another form, another institution that I need to register with, wait for, get a permit, just how are we thinking about these two things? Thank you very much.
Thanks, Luz. I know it's a bit of a question before I put somebody in the spot. Thank you so much.
I'll take the first one on the life expectancy, and I think it's important that we realize, the analogy of a one economy. We have 2 different societies occupying one space in Namibia. Looking at the data that we get from defined benefit funds and annuity funds, the life expectancy for a person receiving a pension is over 15 years higher than the national life expectancy. So the people that we're talking about here do not have a life expectancy of 63 years. They are much closer to 78. So those who have a pension live longer. And it is important in having these conversations and also in our planning conversations as boards of trustees, that we take account of that differentiator, that people where the people with the medical aids and where the people with the jobs, we're much more likely to be in better health than the rest of the population. But the life expectancy for people with a pension is much, much higher than the national life expectancy.
Thank you. Maybe on the balance between sort of savings and business and getting employment rather than building a pension fund.
Yeah, maybe I could touch on your last question. I would hate to see that we are stuck between a rock and a hard place when it comes to implementing the NPF. As we've seen on the presentations from this morning, each pillar has its intended outcome, right? And then tier 2, which I think is pillar 1, where the NPF would lie. The presentation said that usually that is funded by the state. And I think with the current model and design that we have on the table, that those contributions will have to be funded again by employers and employees. And like you rightly said, it's an additional cost. But I think in terms of national discourse, I think that's where our responsibility lies. The stakeholders within the consultative sphere is employers, the government, and the unions. And we cannot remove ourselves as an industry from those consultations. I think that's the first point I like to make. The second point is obviously that the stats don't lie. We know what our unemployment situation is in the country. We have 30% unemployment. We have 55% unemployment if we count those who are discouraged to actually seek jobs. Our youth employment, and that's our economically active part of the population, stands at 47%. And those figures should put alarm bells in all of our minds, right? Then we have the compounded issue of preservation that we spoke about. I can maybe ask the question in the room, and there's no judgment. How many of you have actually dipped into your pot since you've started working? You can raise your hands out of... Don't feel ashamed. You see, and that's about 50% of this room, me included. But the reason for dipping into that pot is maybe something that we should look into. If we talk about mandatory preservation and maybe allowing access to certain percentages of looking at that pot, maybe we can limit it to certain circumstances that you know, you are presented with in life, whether it's looking after your health or paying for your education, and limiting those percentages to those type of life events, and not having to buy a new car or the latest television and or the latest PlayStation for your children and that type of thing. But it's a problem that we know what the problem is, but I think we need to look at innovative ways and come up with alternatives. We know what is on the table. We know what the ILO mandates. What are the other alternatives that we can say? Consider this, or this is what we thought about, and implement that, and not just say, push back and say, no, it can't work. Yeah. So I think that's maybe the question that I would point back. What else can we do, and what can we consider as an industry?
Thank you so much, Sabrina. Can I open up here in front, and then maybe Sean, 2 questions from the floor.
Thank you for hosting and having this panel discussion. I think it's always a privilege that we can ask questions and engage. We don't always get to see you on a daily basis. So I just want to echo a question that Eloise just asked again, because when she was asking it, it just struck me. Because I know professionals who are qualified in this industry that do not want to enter the industry, or I know also professionals that want to exit the industry. And the reasons why, those not wanting to enter says, for me to start a business, it's so risky already. Now I need to enter a profession or an industry where I'll probably have to employ a lawyer from the start just to navigate the compliance component. So maybe I just want to reiterate the question, how easy is it for one person to enter the field who is qualified and registered? Is someone holding his hand, helping him through the process or her through the process? And then second, I would like to talk about something very topical, which I see in the corporate world. I'm in banking, and maybe we can talk to this thing about retirement age, 60. Is it realistic for Namibia? Should we start thinking maybe extending it? I often hear people have this notion that the people have had their time, they need to move out so that we solve the unemployment for the youth. So I think maybe these are conversations. It's leaning towards the economics, but I'm also thinking of oil and gas. Where is Namibia going, and how are we addressing it? Thank you.
I must say, Sean, thanks for the very wide-ranging and detailed questions. Appreciate it. Nico?
Yes, I'll take the second question. The age of 60 it's antiquated. It shouldn't be around anymore. to be quite honest, and I don't know of any people that actually do retire at 60, both because they don't want to retire at 60 and they can't retire at 60. Because if you get to the age of 60, you still have a very, very long time that you need to plan for. So again, it's in the Namibian environment where aging population is not the biggest threat for the retirement system. It's there. It might come in the future, or it will come in the future, but it's not the biggest threat for Namibia. I think there's a lot of other priorities that people are looking at, other than just the retirement fund. My sense of it is there must be some sort of flexibility around 60. 60 needs to move up, because you start creating these expectations of people that when you're 60 you're old and you need to retire. And I think that is a conversation that, even if it's not now the most important thing, in 5 years, 10 years, the expectation is that life expectancy is going to start increasing even much faster than what we've seen in the past. So the sooner you have that conversation to move 60 to 65 and even beyond that, the better. So it's definitely something that one should have. The next question is the unemployment one, which is a challenge. But I think from my perspective, if you've got competent people working in competent companies, that generally does help the economy to go forward, which would also, as a secondary effect, potentially create further jobs. So, yeah, but it's a tough one, that second one to answer. Is it true? Is it not true? I don't know, to be quite honest.
Thank you. We are running a bit of time. Can I answer the question here in front? You also want to...
Thank you very much. I think mine goes to Nico. Nico, I think 1994 is 32 years ago. So mine is a small one. What is different this time? Is it the due date that is given to the Social Security Commission? Is it probably the anticipated proposed model that is to come that is different? Or why do we think that this time this thing is really going to happen? Thank you.
I don't think it's going to happen, to be honest. Also, looking at conversations again back to South Africa, there we've had probably 3 different names to these funds. So it goes through waves, and then it becomes priority, then it falls off priority. And so these big projects, typically, in my experiences, they tend not to happen. So my view is it's probably not going to happen. Probably not going to happen, at least at the level envisioned at the moment. So it's not something. If somebody would ask me, I would say, if somebody would ask me what actions do we need to take to anticipate this, I would say do nothing. Wait until there's absolute clarity to do it. So I'm quite skeptic about it. I'm not saying I'm right, but just my experience is I'm quite skeptic that it's actually going to happen.
Thanks. Maybe then just the last question, I'd like to then open it up to the panel, but even if there's somebody from the floor, please jump in. But Stefan's presentation this morning gave us some insights on other countries and how they have structured their retirement benefit, their systems. Are there any pension structures in these countries that you really stood out for you, that you really think we as Namibia should take a serious hard look at and could really work for us? And I don't think the Lotto Savings Pension Fund is the right one. Can I open it to the floor? But if there's somebody from the floor, please also.
Yeah, I think that's a difficult one, because I think we would have also heard that each and every country is unique. One will obviously have to consider the different demographics of a country, whether it's the labor, demographics, income, and what you have. But I think the one system that I thought, just going through the index, was Chile. I think there was also reference to the World Bank having at one stage favored what the Chileans have done. And they have a defined contribution but compulsory contribution structure where that is run by the private sector. Basically, the private fund administrators manage those schemes, but it is compulsory. So when I look at our environment, we probably have a very, very strong occupational pension fund with all the infrastructure. The regulators are in place, the service providers are in place, asset managers, fund administrators. I would say they probably have the infrastructure to run a model similar to that of Chile. Thank you.
Yes, no, I was just going to say it's, I wouldn't say there's a system that would probably fit our circumstance, but there are aspects of system that we can learn from because of where we are, and Chile started recently from a really nice clean slate. So they didn't have to have this change management process going on to transform a system. So there are aspects in there. Gambling one maybe not, but Kenya maybe.
Maybe in an ideal world, what I would like to see for Namibia is that we emulate what happens in the Netherlands and in the Scandinavian countries. And I think for us to largen our base through deeper participation, more broad scale, widespread participation, increasing our employment levels. I think in an ideal world, the magic bullet for us lies there. And maybe oil and gas and those type of industries creating more employment is the answer, but that remains to be seen.
No, thank you. Thanks so much. Lovisa, Niku, Sabrina, Matthias from our side, thank you so much. There's a lot of flashing going on here. Echard, you better come help us out, so can I hand over back to our MC? Thanks.
All right. Thanks, Bason and esteemed panel, for a very insightful discussion. Very interesting spins on your thoughts there towards the end. Yeah, I mean, Namibia is uniquely placed with a lot of industries taking off at the same time. I think not only oil and gas is a hope, but what's happening in mining and others can be very transformational and may aid to what we can do as a nation with a national pension fund. So with that, Carmen, you can hand out the gifts to all the panelists and speakers. Perhaps if Paddy and Stephen just come to the front also for a photo opportunity. For those of us who need the session for CPD points, it's important to just sign out at the exit there, and please feel free to grab another cool drink also on the way out. And yeah, thank you very much.